Warning, this fic contains many dark and adult themes. For the full list provided by the author, please check the description below and proceed with caution. Welcome back, this is Sectumsempra by Severitus 812, JessalynMichele, Book 2 of Harry Potter and 7 Years of Chaos. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoy, and subscribe for future stories. Please check the description for a full list of tags, and the link to drop a kudos for the original author. With that out of the way, let's get started. Chapter 16, Susan Bones and Dumbledore is a dead man. Harry's been expelled. Susan, who had been watching the library doors intently for the arrival of her best friend, spun around to stare at Draco. "Excuse me," she hissed. "I must have misunderstood you, where is Harry?" Draco shook his head frantically. His usually perfect blonde hair was falling in his eyes. "Blaise and I talked to Professor Snape earlier. He said Harry been expelled." "But I told Professor McGonagall it wasn't him," Hermione wailed. "I was with him before we found Justin." Ron scoffed. "You think they care Hermione? Harry's a Slytherin and a Parselmouth. They just threw him under the hippogriff." "That's not fair," Neville protested quietly. "Harry didn't do it. Don't they care about catching the real heir?" "Clearly not," Blaise drawled. He glanced around and leaned into the rest of their group. "But Snape did say we should write to our relatives and tell them. Not you, Ron. Your family kisses Dumbledore's ass." Ron grimaced but didn't argue. "Susan definitely needs to write to her aunt. Tell her how Harry was expelled with no proof," Draco whispered. "I'm going to go sign up to stay at Hogwarts for the holiday," Neville said softly. "Maybe Harry'll come back during the holiday and he'll want one of us here." Luna hummed softly, "We'll all stay." Susan was surprised that nobody disagreed with Luna's quiet declaration. Neville offered to sign them all up. She agreed with their plans calmly, but Susan was furious. She could feel her fear and anger bubbling up. "Where did Snape say Harry is?" she asked the boys. Blaise grimaced. "He didn't say. Back with his relatives, I suppose." The kids all exchanged worried glances at that. They weren't stupid. They'd all been at this exact table when Harry found out who put him at his relatives, and he'd been furious. They knew he'd needed safe places to stay during the holidays. How nobody from his family ever wrote him. They saw his scars, his flinches, and the way he thought all Muggleborns needed protected from the Muggle world. They weren't stupid. Susan pushed her books away from herself. "I'm going to go talk to Dumbledore." "I'll come with you," Ron offered. Luna put a small hand on his arm. "Susan doesn't want you to. She wants to yell at the headmaster by herself." Susan gave Luna a grateful nod and stalked quickly out of the library towards the headmaster's office. She was going to find that stupid old man and convince him that Harry was innocent. And if she could remember the spell between here and there, she was going to catch his ugly beard on fire too. "Password?" the stone gargoyle asked her after she knocked on the office door. "I don't know the password, but this is an emergency," she said politely. She'd learned young that being polite at first could often get you more than if you started out angry. Harry didn't know that lesson, but he could burn the castle down in an angry fit with just a flick of his pinky finger, and if he wanted to do just that once Susan got him back, she'd help him. "No password, no entry," the gargoyle said. Susan grit her back teeth and glared at the statue. "Fine," she said, "then I'll just knock until he answers." Susan stood outside the headmaster's office long enough that the sun had set. She knocked, screamed, kicked, and then knocked some more. If Dumbledore was up there, he wasn't accepting visitors. "Stupid old man," she yelled, losing her plan of initial courtesy in her frustration of being ignored. "I thought you were a Gryffindor, you coward." "I thought Dumbledore was a Ravenclaw," Blaise said casually, him and her other friends strolling down the corridor towards her. "An idiot like that? No way," Ron snorted. "Gryffindor for sure." "Careful, Ron," Neville said lightly. "I'd hate to tell Fred and George that you think Gryffindors are idiots." "Any luck?" Hermione asked Susan, ignoring the now bickering boys. "No," Susan sighed. "He wouldn't answer. Let's go find Snape." The other kids hustled behind Susan as she jogged down to Snape's office. She knocked briskly before she threw the door open. Snape wasn't there. She shrieked. "Where the hell is everyone?" "Susan, maybe you should sit," Hermione suggested gently. "We'll find him, I swear." Susan didn't want to sit. She wanted to scream at the headmaster. She wanted to find out where Harry was, and she wanted Harry to be back at Hogwarts where he belonged. She took a deep breath and sat in one of the desk chairs. "You're right, Hermione. Thank you." Are we just waiting here for Snape then?" Neville asked quietly. "Seems like it," Theo said, sitting easily in the seat beside Susan. The 8 of them sat quietly in Snape's office, waiting. Most of them looked worried or thoughtful, but Susan doubted whether anyone was as angry as she was. She can't take care of Harry if he isn't here, and he should be here. Dumbledore shouldn't have been able to expel him based on the evidence that he can talk to snakes, and Snape better be making sure that Harry isn't with his relatives. Harry trusted Snape, liked him even, he considered him a friend, so Snape better not leave Harry with a couple of abusive muggles. After quite some time, when Hermione had nervously mentioned curfew had passed, Snape finally showed up. He looked tired and upset, but that wasn't Susan's problem. Susan leapt to her feet immediately. "Harry isn't with his muggle relatives, is he?" Snape didn't even look at her when he answered, "He is not." That wasn't a good enough answer. "Have you found him then?" She knew from the way he still was hardly looking at her what the answer would be. "I have not," he said quietly. And that definitely wasn't a good enough answer. "Then you have to try harder," she yelled, her fury boiling over now that she finally had a target. "Do you think I have done anything aside from my best?" Snape asked harshly. Susan was about to tell him what she thought about his best, when Hermione surprisingly did it for her. "Your best isn't good enough, Professor. Harry was innocent, and now you can't find him." Susan had never heard Hermione talk so rudely to an adult. "What kind of school is this?" Ron cut in. "Kick a kid out for no bloody reason, then you lose him." Snape looked as if he had enough of their complaints. "Get out," he hissed coldly. But Susan didn't care. This was her best friend's life on the line. Harry wasn't safe out there alone. She ignored the dangerous look in Snape's eyes and got up close until she could stare right up at his face. "If Harry is hurt, then I will hold you responsible," she said as threateningly as she could. She ignored the ache that reminded her that she picked up her threatening tone from Harry himself. "He trusted you," she spat, hopping to dig the figurative knife in a little deeper. Nothing got results as quickly as guilt sometimes could. She turned to Lave. She had letters to write. The next several days, Susan mailed off multiple letters. She felt badly using Sevi without Harry's permission, but this was for his benefit. She wrote to her aunt, she wrote to the Daily Prophet, to the Board of Governors for the school, and she even wrote to the Minister of Magic. Her friends helped her compose letters, and they all talked about how to prove Harry was innocent. Hermione and Theo were convinced that they should try and find the real heir, but since most of the students had gone home for the holiday, that was a moot point. Susan had been happy to read the Daily Prophet's article about Harry's disappearance. It meant that people would know what was going on. Blaise explained how his mother owned the majority of shares in the business and was on good terms with all of the reporters. "Now Dumbledore can't keep this quiet," he'd explained in the Slytherin common room that night. "People will have questions. They'll want to know what proof he had, and hopefully with enough pressure he'll have to bring Harry back." Susan desperately hoped so. Of course, to bring Harry back to Hogwarts first, Snape would have to find Harry. "I hope someone else gets attacked soon," Susan said angrily. They had just left Snape's office with no updates again on Christmas Eve, which meant that Harry was going to spend Christmas alone, and that was not okay. Though Professor Snape had asked Susan for a photo of Harry, which made her think he was going to be searching the Muggle world, since every Wixen ever knew what Harry Potter looked like. It had almost killed her to hand over her photo of her and Harry at the fair last summer. It was her favourite photo, which is why she had it on her. Harry had a huge smile. His hair was messy and all over the place. His eyes were sparkling and crinkled in laughter. "Say cheese," she told him at the top of the Ferris wheel. "Why?" Harry laughed. "What's cheese got to do with taking a picture?" They smushed their faces together to take the photo, and Harry hadn't even flinched when she did it. If it meant Snape could find him easier, though, it was worth it, she told herself firmly. "Susan," Hermione gasped, "that's a horrible thing to say." "No, it's not," she snarled at the other girl. "If someone else gets attacked, they'll have to bring Harry back to us, and personally, I hope it's Macmillan." He'd been an idiot the night Justin had been attacked. Susan didn't know when she had been fighting with him in the Hufflepuff common room that Harry was being expelled. If she'd known then, she probably would have done a lot worse than just slapping the stupid prat. "Harry will come back soon," Luna said softly with the airy confidence that she spoke with sometimes. Snape will find him, Neville assured her with a gentle pat on her back. But he's going to be alone tomorrow, she said in a trembling voice. And it's Christmas, you know, and he's going to be alone. Harry might be ridiculously mature, but he was still a kid, just like the rest of them. In some ways Harry was more childlike than the rest of them, she thought, the way he never seemed to understand anything about families, or love, or affection. And now he was just a kid who was alone on Christmas. They all stayed in the Slytherin common room until late that night, worrying about their gang leader, ally, and friend. And when Susan returned to her own bed, she thought of her best friend celebrating Christmas by simply trying to survive, in what she was sure was an impossible situation, and cried herself to sleep. The next morning Susan felt miserable. She'd checked with Snape first thing and he said that he had no new leads, but was hopeful that he could find Harry today. "It's cold outside, Professor," she had yelled. "It's cold and he's all alone and the only family he has is us and we're not with him. Are you a bloody wizard or not? Why can't you find him? Potter is likely feeling threatened by anyone from our world and his magic is interpreting it as a call to hide him from even the most complex of tracking spells," Snape said calmly. "I don't care," Susan said harshly. "I don't care if Harry's moved to another continent. You are supposed to be his friend and you have to find him. He could be hurt or sick and you looking hard enough." In the back of her mind, Susan knew she was being unfair. Snape was gone most hours of the day and she was sure that he was spending that time looking for Harry. But effort didn't matter right now because she needed results. It was no good to try really hard if her best friend was still out there alone somewhere, scared and cold. Snape let her scream for a few more minutes before he just walked out of his own office, calling back a promise to tell her immediately if he found anything. "I'm not going to the feast," she told her friends as she stormed into the Slytherin common room. The two older Slytherins seated on the sofa glanced up but were well used to their group's presence and had long quit complaining that they all knew the password. "I don't want to go either," Draco said. "I'm sick of seeing Dumbledore's face. I wish my father could get rid of him. Then we could get a new headmaster who would bring Harry back." "Not if it's McGonagall," Theo interjected. "She's not exactly Harry's biggest fan either, is she?" "She's been better," Hermione said hesitantly, "but she also took Harry straight to Dumbledore that day. I was right beside him, but Harry was the only one that she suspected." "I'm sure a Muggle-born is going to be the prime suspect of being the heir of Slytherin," Blaise drawled with a roll of his golden eyes. "No more unlikely than the boy who lived," Neville said quietly, effectively ending the argument. They all sat there quietly for a moment before Hermione checked the time. "If we're going to the feast, we should get going," she said. I'm not going to go down there and eat and pretend everything is merry and wonderful when it isn't," Susan said, crossing her arms defiantly. "All students who are in attendance and able-bodied must attend all official feasts in the Great Hall to create an atmosphere of camaraderie and family," Theo quoted. "It's a rule. We have to or we'll be in trouble." "I don't care about being in trouble," Susan yelled. "I'm sick of sitting down there and having to see Dumbledore looking so stupid." Hermione looked slightly offended, probably just at her not caring about being in trouble, since Hermione herself had been giving the headmaster a number of nasty looks lately. "We can eat up here from now on if you'd like," Theo offered, "but we do have to go up to the hall for dinner tonight." Susan huffed, irritated by her friend's current lack of anger, but then she thought about the rule again, and she suddenly had a brilliant idea. "Okay," she said with a mean grin, "we'll go to the feast, but I say we don't create an atmosphere of family." The other kids perked up and listened intently as she explained her plan. "Excuse me," she called, standing up in the Great Hall in the middle of the dinner course. Snape looked up at her and she glared at him. She could tell from the exhausted slump of his shoulders that he still hadn't found any leads on Harry's whereabouts, and she wasn't interested in tired failures. He needed to get results or find someone who would. "Until the remainder of Slytherin House is here to eat meals with us, we will be abstaining from dining in the Great Hall," Draco said loudly, his sneering tone echoing off the stone walls. Susan watched through red-hazed eyes as Dumbledore stood up and smiled at Draco. "I hate him." "My dear boy," Dumbledore said with a smile and sparkling eyes, "your classmates will rejoin you in little over a week. I am sure they will be touched by your demonstration. However, they are enjoying the holiday with their families. Except for Harry, whose only real family is already at Hogwarts." "That is not who we mean, and I think you know that, Headmaster," Blaise said. Dumbledore sat down and shook his head at them. Susan thought he probably meant to look disappointed, but she saw the flash of anger in his eyes. Good, she thought savagely, we're angry too. I am afraid that you cannot abstain from meals, he said firmly. I insist you continue to eat in the hall for your meals. Susan smirked, they'd expected this. She was filled with pride as Hermione cleared her throat and met the headmaster's gaze head-on. You're wrong, sir, she said loudly. There is no rule that says we must eat in the Great Hall or show up for any meal at all, besides official feasts. And we showed up today, Neville added. Susan couldn't stand the headmaster's twinkling eyes anymore. Harry will be back for the next one, she said as confidently as she could. If Harry wasn't at the next one, then she wouldn't be either. She wouldn't stay at a school ran by this idiot without her best friend. She almost lost her composure when Draco drew himself up to his full height and put on a haughty face. I wonder if you will be headmaster, he drawled. Then, exactly as they'd said they would, they all walked out together as a single group. Susan waited until they were in the dungeons before giving Draco a hug. That was brilliant, she gushed. I wonder if you will be, she mimicked in a posh tone. Your father would lose his mind if he'd heard that. Draco gave her a pleased smile and puffed his chest out. My family never liked Dumbledore. Father just finally has an official reason to help eviscerate him in the news. Susan turned to Hermione and gave her a quick hug as well. You did brilliant, Hermione. Harry won't even believe it when we tell him that you quoted the rulebook to the headmaster. Hermione looked around nervously, eyeing the two older Slytherins who followed them out earlier, before giving Susan a grim look. Fuck Dumbledore, she said harshly. Susan couldn't wait to tell Harry about this day. Hey Peeves, come here, please. Peeves, the mischievous Hogwarts poltergeist, flew down from the painting he was irritating to get in Susan's face. It's a wee little badger, he cackled. What's an itsy thing like you wanting with old Peevesy? Susan gave the spirit a sweet smile. Wanna be on the winning side of a war against Dumbledore. Peeves gave a genuine laugh, and they shared a kindred look. Peevesy would be honored, ickle badger. Follow me, Peeves has lots of plans. Susan smiled. She thought this might be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Susan and Peeves spent the next several days trying to ensure that Dumbledore was nearly as frustrated as she was. She knew she'd never be able to make Dumbledore as miserable as she was, or as angry as Harry likely was, but she wasn't going to make this a calm holiday break for him either. Especially not when the Daily Prophet had daily headlines that reminded her of Hogwarts' missing hero. Susan helped Peeves to flood the bathrooms closest to the headmaster's office that he assured her Dumbledore frequently visited. Peeves taught her a neat charm that would cause his office doorknob to scream shrilly every time it was touched. They left dung bombs in the corridor outside his office. Susan left hateful notes on his door, and the Slytherin boys even joined them when they spent a few hours slowly getting charmed snakes under Dumbledore's office door. She almost cried when she remembered that Serpensortia was the spell that outed Harry as a Parselmouth to the whole school. She thought perhaps there was some justice in using it to fill Dumbledore's office with snakes. The night before the rest of the school returned to Hogwarts, Susan and the rest of Harry's friends were gathered in the Slytherin boys' dormitory making new plans. We have to catch the actual heir, Blaise said. They might be laying low now that Harry was expelled though, Theo pointed out logically. Neville scrunched up his nose, but then how do we catch them if there aren't any more attacks? They all fell silent, trying to think of ideas. We go talk to Myrtle, said Luna in her soft and dreamy voice. Why on earth would we need to go talk to a ghost? Hermione asked her sharply. Don't talk to Luna like that, Susan said coldly. Any idea is a good idea unless you have a better one. Hermione scowled but shook her head. Draco turned to Luna and kindly asked her, You mean moaning Myrtle, right? What does she have to do with catching the heir of Slytherin? Luna smiled up at him from where she was laying flat on Ron's bed. She died the last time the Chamber of Secrets was opened, 50 years ago. I just think she might have some clues for us. The rest of the kids stared at Luna, utterly shocked. How do you know that? Ron asked. Luna propped herself up on her elbows and gave them all a surprised look in return. I asked her, she said simply. Of course you did, Blaise muttered, giving Luna a wry grin. You're mad, Luna. Susan would have scolded him, but Luna smiled over at him, apparently pleased by his comment. So tomorrow we should all go talk to Myrtle then, Hermione said, and maybe she'll know something that can help us find the real heir. They all agreed on a time to meet after classes tomorrow, and were about to head to their own beds when the dorm door opened. Snape stood in the doorway and sighed heavily at them all. Miss Bones, Miss Granger, Miss Lovegood, and Mr. Longbottom, I am beginning to believe that you do indeed require a resort. I was not aware we allowed students of other houses in our rooms, he said dryly. He looked at the Slytherin boys and raised his brows at them. Nor was I aware that we allowed female students in the boys' dormitory. Theo rolled his eyes, not against the rules. I will be petitioning for a rewrite of the rules over the summer, Snape said with an eye roll of his own. That's okay, sir, we'd still be grandfathered in for most things according to Rule 326 subsection 11, Hermione told him with her, I know more than you, smile. Hermione could be a bossy twit sometimes, but she also knew the rules better than anyone, and here, lately, she hasn't been afraid to tell any teacher that asked exactly what rules they weren't breaking. Susan could see why Harry liked her so much. Did you find Harry yet? Susan asked Snape, because if not then I swear to Merlin. Save your threats, Severus interrupted her in a drawling voice. I have found Potter and he is safe. He's safe, he's safe, he's safe. The rest of her friends began cheering wildly, and Susan leapt to her feet with a bright smile. Let's go, she said, trying to edge around Snape out of the dorm. I want to see him. Snape stuck his arm out, blocking her from leaving. Potter is ill, he is exhausted, and he is currently sleeping off a dreamless sleep. You have classes in the morning, and your aunt would arrest me if I absconded from the school with you. Of course he's ill, I bet he's been frozen for weeks, she thought with both fury and sadness. This never should have happened. Susan looked up at Snape, and was preparing to tell him exactly how little she cared about propriety, when her best friend was sick, when he cut her off again. Write to Potter and your aunt. I will deliver Potter's letter in the morning if you bring it to me before 6 o'clock. If they both agree, I am willing to take you to him Friday after your final class. Snape glanced around the room behind Susan and sighed. I cannot easily sneak all of you out without being caught and having to answer many questions. Miss Bones is the most irritating, so she will go first. You may all write to Potter, and I will ensure he receives the letters. She didn't care if he thought she was annoying if it meant she could go see Harry and check on him for herself in just 5 days. Her auntie would approve it, she knew she would. She hoped Harry would as well. Thank you, sir, Neville said to Snape politely. We know you've been working hard to find Harry, and even if we haven't been so great about it, we do appreciate you. Susan felt a tiny stab of remorse for how awful she's been to Snape. He had spent weeks trying to find Harry, which was more than any other adult was doing, and he found him and had him somewhere safe now. Thank you, she murmured. If there is nothing else, I am retiring for the night. Any letters left under my office door before 6 o'clock will be delivered tomorrow. Good night. When the door closed behind Snape, Susan turned to her friends. What are we waiting for? She cried. Let's get writing. Dear Harry, I miss you, I miss you, I miss you. Snape said that you were sick, and I hope you're feeling better. He better be giving you potions, and you better be taking them. Everything is horrible without you here. We've all missed you terribly. But we have a new lead on the real heir, so I hope we can find a way to make them reinstate you. Did I say I miss you because I miss you? You'll never believe all the stuff that's happened since you've been gone, Hermione cursed, and Draco totally threatened Dumbledore in front of everyone on Christmas at dinner one night. Snape said that if my aunt is okay with it that I can come see you after classes on Friday. Is that okay? I can bring treacle tart, don't worry about us, we're all fine. And don't worry about Sevi, Blaise and I have been taking good care of him. I did send him on a couple trips with letters to my aunt, but I think he liked the chance to fly. I can't wait to see you Friday. Hogwarts isn't the same without you. Love, your best friend. Susan. When classes started back up, Susan was only slightly distracted from her private war against Dumbledore by a new bigger annoyance, the other students. Not too distracted though. Peeves had begun screaming obscenities in the halls based on the posters she was leaving every day on the headmaster's office door. Hearing the poltergeist repeatedly scream, "You're an old fool, Dumbledore," was an excellent way to start her day. But now, everywhere she went, the returning students were talking about Harry, whispering behind their hands, giggling about him being gone, and outright cheering at their supposed newfound safety. As if Harry had ever been the threat. If you say one more word, I swear to Merlin I am going to kill you, she hissed at Ernie Macmillan during their history of magic class. Hermione also gave the Hufflepuff boy a disdainful look. I'll help her, she warned, holding her wand tightly. Ernie had been talking loudly with Hannah Abbott about how, with Potter gone, Muggleborns are safe again. As if he ever gave a damn about Muggleborns, not like Harry. Harry who cut Draco for calling Hermione the M-word, and who made him apologize in front of the entire school for it. These kids were so stupid. Harry was powerful and strong, and could literally talk to the monster that was attacking students. And Dumbledore kicked him out, because he was also stupid and didn't see why the school needed Harry more now than ever. By Wednesday night, Susan was ready to drop out herself. Harry wrote back a couple short notes that just said he was fine, she can come over on Friday, and that he was trying to find a new school to go to. She knew it was stupid, but she didn't want to go to Hogwarts without him. I'll transfer too, she wrote. Don't be mad, Harry wrote back. What about your friends? She wondered if Harry knew he still had friends here as well, or if he thought they'd all just forgotten about him. We'll talk about it tomorrow, she sent along with Snape Thursday morning before breakfast. She walked into the Slytherin common room and saw her friends were all huddled tightly together around the table they'd nicked to eat at, arguing in hushed voices. I'm going to kill them, Ron swore. I'll help, Neville told him, still sporting a split lip from the fight he got in yesterday. Who are we killing? Susan asked, sliding into her customary seat and glancing sadly at the empty one they left in the corner for Harry. The other kids gave her a wary look and shuffled uneasily, except for Luna, who just hummed. Probably Harry's relatives first, but definitely Dumbledore next, she said brightly. Okay, Susan agreed simply. Why are we killing them? Draco glanced at Blaise, who grimaced in return and shook his head. Susan was beginning to get an uneasy feeling in her stomach. Why are we killing them? She repeated slowly, staring down her friends. Here, Ron said, thrusting the newspaper towards her. You'll hear about it anyway. Daily Prophet breaking news. Exclusive interview with the boy who lived. Susan read the article and could feel her muscles coiling tightly with anger. The headmaster took my wand, then had the groundskeeper drop me off at my aunt and uncle's house. They hate magic. They hate me. They threw me out immediately. I didn't have anywhere to go for a long time. I just finally feel safe. I want to be a normal kid. Susan's hands shook as she finished the article. Ah, Susan, you're shaking the table, Theo said hesitantly. Susan looked down and saw that she was shaking the table. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself and threw the paper down. I have to go, she declared, jumping to her feet. Where are you going? Hermione called as she stalked through the packed common room. I'm going to go talk with Headmaster, she called back. Before the portrait door slammed behind her, she heard an older Slytherin girl mutter, she's going to bloody murder him. She might. It would be worth it. Get out here, Susan yelled, flinging another stink pellet at the headmaster's office door. Cowardly lion, Peeves laughed, flinging his own pellets at the door. Meddling stupid coward. Susan boned. Susan looked up from her pile of pellets, panting from shouting at the silent door. Professor Sprout, she said politely, how are you? Professor Sprout looked down at the pellets, looked at the pellet-covered office door, stared at Peeves, then back to Susan. What on earth are you doing? She finally asked. Trying to get an audience with the headmaster. By screaming at his office door, Sprout asked incredulously, did you think that would work? Susan shrugged, knocking didn't, throwing things didn't, screaming was a last option. The cowardly lion is scared to face the mean little badger, Peeves laughed. The badger is angry. Professor Sprout gave her a sympathetic look. I understand why you would be upset, but this isn't the way to fix it. How then? Susan demanded. How do I fix it? Sprout walked over beside her and placed a warm hand on her shoulder. You wait, she said kindly. You go to your classes, you hold on to hope, and you wait. Susan shook off her hand. I'm sick of waiting, she said. It's all so unfair, Professor. I know, dear, but this will be resolved. We just have to be patient. Susan nodded, not agreeing but not stupid enough to argue with her head of house either. Why don't you clean this up and head to your next class, since it seems you've missed first hour? Professor Sprout suggested with a thin smile. Yes, ma'am, Susan agreed obediently. She was storing the piles of unused pellets back in their bag. She'd use them again later, when Sprout turned back to her. "Detention tomorrow, dear," she said pleasantly. "What?" Susan gaped at her. Tomorrow was her day to go see Harry. Can't we do it tonight, or Saturday maybe? "Afraid not," Sprout said kindly. "I've got a lot of work to do, and tomorrow after dinner is the best time for me. You should keep this in mind next time you choose to act in a way unfitting for our house." She shook her head at Susan and continued down the corridor. Susan glared at Dumbledore's door. If he had opened his door when she first knocked, then she wouldn't have been in this predicament. "I hate you," she hissed. "Yeah," Peeves chimed in, "we hate you." "If he comes out, throw the rest of these right in his face," she instructed him. "I suppose I'm headed to class." She'd just write to Harry and explain what happened. She could go Saturday and they'd talk about all of this. No big deal. Susan was serving her detention with Professor Sprout the next evening. The professor had her in charge of ripping out old tarantula vines, which suited her just fine. They were reluctant to be torn out and fought her. It was nice to finally find something she could destroy without consequences. "Great job, dear," Professor Sprout praised her. "Just keep ripping." All in all, not a bad detention. Snape assured her that she was welcome to go to where Harry was. He didn't say any details, but she was sure it was his own house, tomorrow, and spend the whole day if she wanted. Which she absolutely did. She was working up a sweat fighting a particularly reluctant vine when Neville came bursting in the greenhouse. "Susan, Professor, come quick," he yelled before turning around and running back out. Susan glanced at Professor Sprout, who looked just as bewildered as she was, and they both took off after him. "What's going on?" she asked Neville once she'd caught up to him halfway across the lawn. "They just found another student," he said. "It's the same as the others." "Yes," Susan cheered, leaping in the air. "Miss Bones, how could you?" Professor Sprout admonished her, panting slightly as she ran to keep up with them. "This is proof," Susan cried. "They'll have to bring Harry back now." Sprout gave her a disappointed look. "It won't be worth Mr. Potter's reinstatement if a child has died, Miss Bones." Susan hummed, increasing her stride. Personally, she thought it would be. "They aren't dead," Neville said, keeping stride with her despite his shorter legs. "Just petrified." "Excellent," Susan said quietly, exchanging a grin with the Gryffindor boy. "There's no way to pin it on Harry this time." They ran through the entrance hall, and Neville guided her to the second floor, where a crowd of students were congregated. "Susan," Hermione cried, reaching out for her. "Did you hear?" "It was a 6th year," Ron told her, his arm wrapped around his pale-faced and trembling sister. "Some Ravenclaw bird, they just took her to the hospital wing." "Her name is Cheyenne," Luna said softly. Ron grimaced at Luna. "Sorry," he mumbled sheepishly. "I don't care," Susan waved her hand. "Where, Dumbledore?" She stood up on her tiptoes to see over the heads of the other students, and when that failed, she elbowed her way to the front. Dumbledore was standing beside Professor McGonagall, a stricken look on his face. "Good," she thought angrily, "this is your fault." As if Dumbledore read her thoughts, he suddenly looked up and made eye contact with her. "Miss Bones," he said softly, probably trying to lull her into trusting him, as if that would ever happen, "where have you been this evening?" "Why?" Susan demanded loudly, ensuring the students could all hear. "Planning on pinning this one on me since Harry isn't here." McGonagall gasped at her tone, but Dumbledore gave her a small smile. Fake smile, she thought. His eyes were no longer the warm twinkling blue they usually were. They were icy cold and as light as the sky. "Of course not," he said with a wave of his hand. "I was merely curious if you had been in contact with Mr. Potter recently." "You mean the innocent student you expelled?" she yelled. "Nope. How are you planning on blaming him this time?" The students behind her were increasing the volume of their whispers. "Potter wasn't even here," she heard one kid say. "Miss Bones was with me," Professor Sprout said, coming to stand beside her. "Ah, excellent," Dumbledore said genially, still staring intently at Susan. "Albus, perhaps we should take this to your office," McGonagall suggested with a pointed look at the crowd of whispering students. "Excellent idea, Professor," Dumbledore agreed, finally breaking his cold gaze. "Make sure you beg Harry for forgiveness," she yelled at Dumbledore's retreating back. She thought perhaps the other professors were just as upset about the situation, since none of them even took points for her disrespect. Susan looked around her and was pleased to see her friends were surrounding her back. "Let's go," she said, turning to run off down the stairs. "Go find Percy, Gin," Ron whispered to his now crying sister. "He'll get you some hot chocolate or something, okay?" "Where we going?" Neville asked. "Snape, of course," Susan said. "He has to get to Dumbledore's office quickly before they have time to pin it on Harry or one of us." "He isn't here," Draco wailed, once they entered Snape's office and saw it was empty. "Do you think he's already in Dumbledore's office?" Hermione asked. Luna shook her blonde head. "I'm sure he's with Harry." "We'll wait here," Blaise said. Susan was bouncing eagerly on the balls of her feet. "Harry can come back now. He can come back. They have to bring him back." She was still thinking happily of reuniting with her best friend when Snape came through his flue. "Professor," Draco said excitedly, "you have to go to Dumbledore's office immediately." Susan was so happy to see Snape, knowing he'd go fight for Harry, that she threw her arms around the man in a tight hug. There's been another attack. Chapter 17, Hogwarts. "Potter!" Harry jumped up from his spot in the recliner, startled by Snape's brisk tone calling from the fireplace. "Sir," he called back cautiously, inching towards the fireplace, Is everything all right?" Snape had just left. Why would he be calling already? Unless he really didn't want Harry to live here, but was too cowardly to have said it in person. "There has been another attack," Snape said quickly, his head finally appearing in the flames. "I wanted you to know immediately because I need to know, do you wish to return to Hogwarts?" Harry froze. "What?" he said lamely. "Focus, we don't have time to stall," Snape said briskly, though not unkindly. "I need to know if you want to return to Hogwarts before I go start fighting Albus for your reinstatement." At the sound of the headmaster's name, Harry's lip curled. Dumbledore can go foo. "We miss you, Harry." "Susan." Snape gave Harry an intense gaze before nodding curtly. "I'll go fight with the headmaster then, shall I?" Harry just stared at the green flames as Snape's head disappeared. "Don't get your hopes up. When has anything ever worked out right for you? You don't need Hogwarts. You can be special by yourself. You don't need anyone or anything." Harry was jerked from his internal mantra by the appearance of Susan's head now resting in the place Snape was before. "Susan," he breathed, moving closer to the flames. "Is that you?" They passed a few letters back and forth in the week he'd been at Snape's house, but he hadn't actually seen her since the day he was expelled, almost a month ago. "Harry, it's me," she squealed. "And everyone else is here too. Hey guys." Harry's view of her face was cut off as she turned to look behind her. "Say hi to Harry." "Hi, Harry." Harry heard a chorus of his friends in Snape's office calling out to him, and he felt a tightness in his stomach, one that he hadn't even been aware of before now, loosen. "Harry, you'll get to be here soon," Susan said with a beaming grin. "There was another attack, some 6th-year Ravenclaw girl. They just found the body right after dinner." "Is she dead?" Harry asked curiously. "No, petrified like the others," Susan said, her excitement not dulling in the slightest. "But don't you see, now that's proof that you didn't do it, so Dumbledore will have to bring you back." Harry frowned again at the mention of Dumbledore's name. Maybe he didn't want to go to Hogwarts while he was still there. Italy was brilliant, and the Contessa said that he'd get to study magic that Hogwarts would never approve of. Susan must have read some of his thoughts on his face, since his bloody barriers were gone, because the excited sparkle in her eyes dimmed. You do want to come back, don't you?" she asked quietly. "I dunno," Harry admitted quietly. "I don't want to be there with Dumbledore." Susan's normally cheerful face morphed into something hateful. "We won't even deal with him. We'll just refuse. He might be the headmaster, but he's also an idiot, and I'm not putting up with his prejudice and bigotry anymore." Harry grinned at her rant. "Snape says you've been putting rude notes on his office door." "I have," she grinned, unrepentant, and Hermione even cursed his name. "Hey," came the indignant cry of Hermione, "don't tell him that." "Tell her I said that's brilliant," Harry grinned. "Why'd she wait until I was expelled to start cursing?" Susan rolled her eyes. "It's because you were expelled, stupid. We've just been trying to make Dumbledore as miserable as we all were." "You were miserable?" Harry asked softly, hoping his other friends couldn't hear him sounding so pathetic. "Of course we were," Susan said back just as quietly. "You're our friend and we miss you." Harry smiled at her. He'd secretly hoped that he would still have friends at Hogwarts, but he wasn't really sure. I gotta go, he said, thinking quickly. I have to call someone before Snape gets back. Okay, I'll see you soon, Susan asked hopefully. If all goes well, he said with a smirk, tell everyone, tell them I said hi, okay? All right, talk to you soon. Harry pulled away from the fireplace and waited for Susan's head to disappear before he threw a pinch of the powder in and called, Malfoy Manor. Hello, Dobby, Harry greeted the Malfoy's elf kindly. Would you please get Mr. Malfoy for me? Dobby would be honored to help Mr. Harry Potter, the weird elf squealed excitedly. Dobby will be getting master right away. Harry tried very hard not to roll his eyes at Dobby's exuberant tone. Dobby was obsessed with him. At least Mavis, as cunning as he was, didn't harp on about Harry's fame. He waited impatiently until Mr. Malfoy finally arrived in the parlor. Mr. Potter, he said cordially, how can I help you this evening? How would you like a job? Harry asked quickly. I need a barrister and you always say you're the best, don't you? Malfoy was too posh to show any surprise, but he did raise a single, perfect, blonde brow. What do you need a barrister for? He asked. Harry smirked at him. I need legal defense against Albus Dumbledore. What will it cost me to hire you? If you would kindly allow me a few minutes to gather myself, I can flew to your location, where we can discuss this further, Malfoy said with a wry grin of his own. Brill, the password is still Sevi, see you soon. Harry paced around the sitting room, thinking hard about how to handle Dumbledore if Professor Snape was even able to get him reinstated. He had told the headmaster that he was going to kill him. The old man probably wasn't happy about that. He looked up from his packing when the flue chimed, and Mr. Malfoy elegantly stepped through. Harry smirked when he realized that gathering himself apparently meant changing into a posher robe than he had on before. All right, Mr. Potter, let's talk. Harry and Malfoy were still seated in the recliners, discussing their plan, when Snape came through the flue. Lucius, he said with a quizzical expression, I was not aware that you had a meeting with Potter tonight. Mr. Potter has retained my services, Malfoy said with his pretentious drawl. Oh, Snape looked at Harry, and what services did you require Lucius for? Harry's smirk wavered slightly. Would Snape be mad about their plan? Dumbledore was his boss after all. Well, it just depends on what Dumbledore said to you tonight, he stalled. Snape crossed his arms and leant casually against the now empty fireplace. You are being immediately summoned to the headmaster's office for a discussion on your continued enrollment at Hogwarts, he said simply. Harry jumped to his feet with a broad grin. Brill, let's go. Hold on, Malfoy stopped him. You will not respond immediately to a summons from Albus Dumbledore. You do not present yourself a child desperate for his approval or blessing, he sneered. Severus, kindly inform the headmaster that, as it is currently 7 o'clock on a Friday evening, Mr. Potter is amenable to meeting with him to discuss multiple matters of importance on Monday morning. That's genius, Harry breathed. Malfoy gave him a smug look. That is what I'm here for. Snape sighed and sat down on one of the new sofas. Albus won't be pleased to be dismissed like this, he warned. If he's going to be mad about that, he'll really hate that I'm suing him, Harry said with a small grin towards Snape. What? Whatever Snape had been about to say was interrupted by the chime of the flue. For the love of Merlin, Snape muttered, bending down to accept the call. Severus, is Harry there? I just got a message from Dumbledore. Madame Bones' face was floating in the fire, looking frantic. He is here, Snape said. What message did you receive? Albus seems to think Harry is with me, Madame Bones explained. I just received a patroness requesting I bring Harry to Hogwarts immediately to discuss the recent attack. The recent attack, Malfoy sneered, not Potter's reinstatement. Madame Bones grimaced. Right, but if there has been another attack. There has, Snape said. Then we use this as grounds to have the expulsion reversed if Harry still wants to attend Hogwarts. All three adults looked beseechingly at Harry. Yeah, he said firmly. My friends are there, aren't they? And I shouldn't have been expelled in the first place. Then we fight for it, Snape said with a look of approval. Albus was reluctant to extend the offer of a meeting. Minerva and myself had to convince him. There was another attack, and he was still reluctant to reach out to Mr. Potter, Malfoy asked, making a quick note on his parchment. Did he say why? Snape gave Harry a long-suffering look and sighed. Potter threatened to kill him when he was expelled. Albus believes that Potter is the second rising of the Dark Lord. Apparently he believes the students would be in danger, with Potter in attendance. Madame Bones scoffed. Malfoy gave Harry an appraising look, and Harry, he preened just a bit. He was flattered that Dumbledore had clearly been shaken by his threat. He hoped Dumbledore remembered all the wrongs he'd done to him when he did eventually kill him. A 12-year-old child said something mean when he was being evicted from his home unfairly. Madame Bones said dryly, "Yes, that seems to line right up with the Muggle-born slaughters that Voldemort endorsed." Nobody ever accused Dumbledore of clear thought when it comes to either Potter or the Dark Lord, Snape agreed. "Well, Severus, are you joining us in Dumbledore's office tonight?" Madame Bones asked, returning the conversation back to the original topic. "Excuse me, Madame Bones," Malfoy cut in smoothly, "but Mr. Potter will not be responding to Albus' call tonight. Would you be amenable to sending a message informing him that Potter will be in his office Monday morning at 8 o'clock? We do have quite a bit of work to complete between now and then." He gave Harry a sly look, witnesses to gather, paperwork to complete, lawsuits to file. Harry thought that Madame Bones might not like that, she was a cop after all, but she gave Malfoy a curt nod. "Of course, I'll meet you all here at 1:15 on Monday morning then, shall I?" "Why?" Harry blurted. He ducked his head and flushed slightly as the adults all looked at him again. "I mean, I just meant, why are you coming to the meeting, ma'am?" "Because you are a ward of the Ministry until your guardianship is completed," Madame Bones explained kindly, "and I will be there to represent you in loco parentis." "Oh, okay. Until then, gentlemen, I will be available at home this weekend." After Madame Bones disconnected from the flu, Harry relaxed back into his seat. "Well, Mr. Potter, shall we get on with it?" Malfoy asked with a raised brow. "Let's do it," Harry agreed. They continued discussing their plan of attack for Monday morning, easily ignoring Snape, who was muttering things about insane children and political warfare as he sipped a drink. By the time Snape and Malfoy left Friday night, Harry felt optimistic about his chances of returning to Hogwarts on Monday. Really, if Mr. Malfoy had represented him legally from the get-go, he probably never would have been expelled. The man was a shark. He knew more about law and politics than anyone else Harry had ever met, and that includes the Minister of Magic. He wondered if Malfoy knew the laws for the same reasons Harry began learning them. You needed to know what laws you were and weren't breaking when you made plans. Saturday morning, he began reluctantly gathering his belongings that had somehow become strewn across Snape's house. He figured that he would either be back at Hogwarts or in Italy come Monday afternoon, and it would be best to be prepared for either outcome. Harry found a single trainer underneath one of the kitchen chairs and a jumper on a bookshelf. He shook his head at himself. He never should have made himself this comfortable here. It was stupid to get attached to a place that could be taken away from him in a blink. Just look at Hogwarts. That afternoon, Harry was eating lunch and arguing with Mavis about the difference between forced slavery and choosing to work as a house elf when the flu went off. He kept eating, assuming it was Snape, and listened to Mavis' squeaky admonishment. "Elves is not having strong powers when they is not having master," Mavis explained while stirring batter in a bowl. "What if you had a wand?" Harry asked. "Then you would be able to channel your own power, not your master's, wouldn't you?" "Potter, you cannot give your house elf a wand." Harry looked up and grinned at Snape, who was leaning against the kitchen doorframe. "Why not? I'm not using M." Harry gaped as his red-headed best friend ran past Snape and stopped just short of where Harry was seated. "Susan," he asked, inching backwards subtly, "what are you doing here?" Susan huffed and sat in the chair opposite from Harry, Snape's usual seat, and smiled at him. "We said I'd come over today, right? My auntie said I could. So Tada." She shook her hands in a waving motion and Harry laughed at her theatrics. "You've been around Draco too much," he accused fondly. "You have no idea, Mr. Potter," Snape drawled from the doorway. "I will return at 5 o'clock to return Miss Bones to Hogwarts." He gave them both a severe look. "I would appreciate it if our home was not destroyed when I return." Susan gave the man a small smirk, as they both agreed, before Snape swept off back to the sitting room. "Our home?" Susan asked, easily plucking a few crisps off Harry's plate. "Did I miss something?" Harry grimaced and shrugged. Susan was his best friend, and usually he felt like he could tell her anything, but what if that changed while he was gone? "What's everyone doing today?" he asked instead. Susan rolled her eyes at his obvious subject change, but indulged him anyway. Hermione and Theo are wasting their whole day revising. Draco and Ron are flying even though it's freezing out and they'll probably get sick. Luna is hunting for Raxperts with Neville, and I have no idea where Blaise is, she said, ticking each kid off as she listed them. Theo and Hermione are studying together, Harry asked, scrunching his nose. That sounds like the world's most boring day ever. Susan giggled and leaned forward slightly, even though Mavis was the only other person in the room. I think Theo has a crush on Hermione, she said. He's always offering to study together, and he even made Blaise trade him seats at meals so he could sit beside her. Oh, Harry thought about how Theo and Hermione were the only two in their group who really got crazy about studying and loved to read. I guess they have a lot in common. Susan laughed and adopted a faux posh tone. Well, they're only 12, so it's likely just a phase that'll pass. Harry shrugged. He didn't know anything about relationships, and didn't really care to learn either. Is everyone being decent to Luna? He asked. He worried that they'd stop hanging out with Luna without Harry there, and she'd be lonely and an open target for bullies again. Of course, Susan said indignantly. Do you think I'd let anyone be mean to her? Sorry, Harry mumbled sheepishly. I was just checking. It's fine, Susan waved her hand, easily brushing off his implications. Hey, did Snape tell you about me and Peeves? He said you got detention for throwing stink pellets at Dumbledore's office door with him. Susan gave him a mischievous grin. That's just the only time we got caught. Harry grinned back. He could just imagine the sort of chaos that an angry Susan and Peeves would create. What do you guys do? Tell me why Snape said our home and I'll tell you, she offered with a smirk. Sneaky, Harry accused while Mavis cackled in the background. That's not fair. Miss Susan is using Master Potter's tricks against him, Mavis snorted. Master Potter probably taught Miss Susan to be a trickster. He's right, Susan said. This is really your fault. Harry stared at her for a long time, and she just watched him silently. Is everything different? He asked quietly. Never, Susan said, understanding his question immediately. We are still best friends. You'll still keep my secrets. Susan nodded. Her usually sparkling eyes were uncharacteristically solemn. We'll always be best friends, I swear. Harry had always relied on his gut instincts. They hadn't steered him wrong in 12 years. And his gut instincts said that Susan was still just as trustworthy as she's been since the day they met. Your aunt is helping Snape get guardianship of me. Really, that's wicked, Susan said with a broad smile. Is that what you want? Suppose so, Harry shrugged. She showed me a bunch of people who applied after they read the news, but they just liked me because I'm famous. Snape's different, isn't he? Susan's eyes darkened. Speaking of the news, do you want to talk about that? Harry rolled his eyes at her. Not a chance. Tell me about Peeves. Susan huffed but immediately launched into her story. Harry listened eagerly, snacking on the biscuits Mavis gave them. And then Peeves said Dumbledore is scared of little snaky Potter, and I thought, let's fill his office with snakes then. Harry laughed so hard at some of her stories that his stomach began to hurt. I can't believe you didn't even get detention, he said, wiping actual tears of laughter off his face. Well, I did have one yesterday, Susan admitted, but then someone got petrified so I didn't even have to stay the full time. Good timing then, Harry said. Especially if it means you get to come back, she agreed. Oh wait, did I tell you about Myrtle? She suddenly cried. Hold on, wait, Harry interrupted her. You'll never believe what Dumbledore told me. No, wait, listen. Myrtle died when the chamber opened. Myrtle was killed by the monster. Harry and Susan stared at each other in shock for a moment before they began laughing. How did you find out? Harry asked. Luna, Susan said simply. Fucking Nargles, Harry grumbled, still upset that he couldn't see them or hear them. Susan giggled but shook her head. It wasn't the Nargles, she just talked to Myrtle and got to know her. Brill, Harry said impressed. Luna's amazing. She really is, Susan agreed. And now we have a lead on who the actual heir is. Harry snorted. I don't give a damn about who it is, as long as the other houses know it isn't me. You don't want to catch them? Susan asked with her nose scrunched up. I thought you'd want revenge or something. Harry had thought a lot about it since he'd been expelled. The heir of Slytherin hadn't done anything to him, personally. They hadn't attacked his friends, they weren't the one who shoved him in the halls or broke his nose, and they weren't the one who expelled him and tried to send him to Surrey. They aren't bothering us though, not really, right? So I say, if they aren't bothering us then we don't bother them. It was a good piece of advice that Harry had learned fast on the streets. A lot of the other street kids and homeless folk wouldn't bother you as long as you kept your head down and your nose in your own business. So we can't go find the Chamber of Secrets? Susan asked with a pouting lip. Theo is going to be disappointed. He thinks there'll be a bunch of books and journals about Slytherin culture and history in there. That would be something Theo is worried about, Harry said dryly. Him and Hermione both are so bloody weird about books. Maybe Theo only likes Hermione for her books, Susan said with mock solemnity. Harry laughed and smiled at Susan. It was good having her here, it was almost just like being at Hogwarts. They finished off the plate of biscuits, and then Susan asked for a tour of the house before Snape got back. All right, come on, I'll show you the stuff I changed, Harry offered. He showed her the sitting room, with the brilliant new sofas, and the library with the new bookshelves. He cracked open Snape's bedroom door to point out the fresh paint and furniture that Mrs. Malfoy had picked out after assuring him she knew Snape's taste well. They passed the potion lab, but Harry explained how he didn't change anything in there, because he was afraid Snape would kill him if he did. And this is the room I've been staying in, Harry said, opening his door and waving Susan inside. Why isn't it all green and posh like the rest of the house? Susan asked curiously. Harry shrugged. I figured Snape didn't need a guest room to match his style, as Draco's mum calls it, so I just left it alone. Susan sat down on his bed and crossed her legs underneath her. But it's not his guest room anymore, is it? It's your room, so you should decorate it how you want. Harry hesitated when she said that. If Snape got guardianship of him, like Minister Fudge said he would, then this would be his room. It's not like there was anywhere else for Harry to sleep. Snape didn't even have a cupboard under his staircase. But if he decorated it then got it taken away, it would be miserable. He didn't want to get too attached to a bedroom, or a house in general. Everything could be taken away from him easily. I'll think about it, he lied. Well, here, Susan dug in her robe pocket for a few seconds before she pulled out a photo. You should hang this on the wall anyway. Harry took the photo from her and smiled at the picture of their whole gang. They had Daphne Greengrass take on the train on the way to school in September. They were all seated in their compartment and had just gotten done eating when they saw Daphne walk by, and Susan stopped her to ask her to take their photo. It's our first official group photo, she declared, throwing one arm around Harry and one around Ron. Everyone say cheese. We should take a new one soon, she said, politely ignoring how hard Harry was staring at the photo. We'll need it updated to include Luna. Yeah, Harry said softly, we can do that. He walked over to the side of his bed and held the photo against the wall. Keep the photo on the wall, he thought, giving his core a light tug and smiling happily once the photo had been magically stuck to the wall. Harry and Susan didn't know it then, but a small silver instrument in Albus Dumbledore's office began emitting a high-pitched beep. What's that racket? One of the portraits on the wall asked the headmaster, who was inspecting the instrument. Headmaster Dumbledore sighed deeply before he answered, the wards around Harry Potter's home have fallen. Harry hadn't slept well on Sunday night, even with the dreamless sleep Snape had made just for him. He laid in bed until the early hours of the morning thinking of all the ways the upcoming meeting could go wrong. He eventually gave sleep up as a bad job and made his way to the kitchen. He sat at the marble-topped table and sipped a cappuccino. He felt a bit like a tosser when he bought it on Mrs. Malfoy's recommendation, but he had to admit that cappuccinos were a lot tastier than regular coffee. Maybe he'd see if he could get Mavis to bring him some to school sometimes. Unless he was in Italy, Lady Messer swore her school served cappuccinos all the time. Harry watched out the window as the sun started to rise. He was going to be a little disappointed to leave, despite his best efforts not to be. It was peaceful here. Harry was feeling so content he'd started dozing lightly in his seat, glasses still on, and one hand wrapped around his mug. Lucius will be here soon. Harry jumped about a foot off his chair and yelped in surprise. He turned around and saw Snape was smirking in the doorway, holding a white box. What are you doing here? Harry asked, sopping up his now spilt drink. Snape walked over to the table and slid the box towards Harry. I wanted to give you this before your meeting today. Harry looked down at the box, then back up at Snape and at the box again. "What is it?" he asked warily. Snape sighed, moving to the counter to make himself a hot cappuccino. "You could open it and find out," he said lightly, "unless you believe you can develop the power to see through solid objects." Harry made a mental note to try and see if he could do just that eventually. It would be bloody useful. He glanced over at Snape and saw that he was still facing away from him, so he slowly opened the box and peeked inside. "I believe you have a certain image to cultivate today," Snape said casually as Harry pulled the item out of the box. It was a set of robes, really posh robes, not unlike the ones Mr. Malfoy wears, except instead of the solid black he favors, these were a deep emerald green. "They're dress robes," Snape explained, paying no mind to Harry, who was running his hands over the thick, rich material. "They're perfect," Harry said quietly, picturing himself wearing something so nice. "Thank you, I'll pay you back." "I will be deeply insulted if you even attempt to pay me for them," Snape said. "Most wizards your age already own a pair of dress robes. You had not required any before now, so I mistakenly did not advise you to purchase any. I fixed my own mistake, that is all." Harry looked up at Snape, who was watching him with a neutral look. "I don't like owing people things," he said shortly. "I'd like to pay you back. And I will require no repayment other than you wearing those this morning, and giving Albus Dumbledore as much of a terrible migraine as you consistently give me." Harry, who had been trying very hard not to bother Snape in any way in case he changed his mind about the guardianship, glared at the man. "That's not a fair trade. I bet these were expensive." Snape sent a pointed look around the kitchen. "And refurbishing our home was certainly a frugal decision, I'm sure," he said dryly. "If you can waste your money on nonsense for my benefit, then I certainly can spend a meager amount of my savings on a set of dress robes for my future ward." He smirked at Harry and raised his brows. "You do reflect back on me now. I'd hate to have my good name tarnished because of a wardrobe oversight." Harry scoffed but gave Snape an appreciative nod. "I'll try and not sully your good name," he said sarcastically. He then added on a much more genuine, "Thank you, sir." "It was no bother," Snape said, waving one hand airily, "though you should hasten to change and prepare for Lucius and Amelia." He checked his watch and put his now empty mug in the sink. "I must return to Hogwarts. I will see you shortly, as Albus has invited me to attend as your previous head of house." Harry nodded, feeling his nerves returning with the mention of the upcoming meeting. Snape walked a little closer to him and lightly placed one hand on his shoulder. "Are you certain of the tactic you have chosen?" he asked seriously. "I believe poor orphan Harry may be more well received than Heir Potterblack will be." Harry studied the floor as he thought about his answer. "I don't want to be poor orphan Harry," he said after a moment. "I hate Dumbledore and I don't want to seem weak in front of him. He doesn't like me anyway, why bother pretending?" He looked up at Snape and saw that he had a look of approval on his face. "No point at all, I suppose," he agreed easily. "I believe Albus has now identified you as a possible threat to him and would see through any pretense otherwise." Harry agreed. That's what Mr. Malfoy had talked about on Friday night too. Snape made to leave the kitchen when Harry called out one of his biggest worries to him. "Do you think he'll try and hurt me?" he blurted. Snape turned and gave Harry a weird look. His eyes were warm but his scowl was fierce. It was an odd juxtaposition. "I do not believe Albus would be foolhardy enough to physically attack you, no. And if he attempts to legitimize you or otherwise intimidate you, then you only have to give me a signal, and I will ensure he never does again," Snape swore. "I shall see you there." Harry watched him leave and stood in the kitchen, holding his new robes tightly as he considered what he said. Snape was a bastard sometimes, but he was a decent bloke overall. At exactly 8 o'clock, Harry, Mr. Malfoy, and Madame Bones stepped through the flue directly into Dumbledore's office. Dumbledore stood to greet them. "Amelia, Lucius, I was not aware you would be joining us," he said warmly. "I'll have to conjure a few chairs." "No need," Malfoy drawled. "Harry, if you would." Harry waved one of his hands, focusing very strongly on 4 posh chairs to appear, and smirked at Dumbledore as he sat himself down in between Madame Bones and Mr. Malfoy. "He does not intimidate you," Mr. Malfoy had coached him. "You will intimidate him while appearing perfectly compliant." 1 point to Team Harry, he thought smugly. Dumbledore glanced at Snape, who Harry now saw was standing by the office door. "Wonderful," he said, his eyes looking like it was anything but. "Though I believe we can leave the board out of a mere meeting with a student," he said with a polite look at Mr. Malfoy. "I am not here as a board member, Dumbledore," Malfoy sneered. I am here in my official capacity, representing the legal interests of Heir Potterblack. Harry was impressed by the lack of surprise Dumbledore showed. He checked the wall on the clock and curled the edges of his lips up a bit. If Dumbledore wasn't surprised yet, he would be in about 10 minutes. Heir Black, Dumbledore said with a puzzled frown. I believe Harry is not yet old enough to claim his heirships. You are on the Wisengamot, Madame Bones said in an exasperated tone. You know the laws. Harry's the only heir for both lines, which means he is eligible to claim them at any point. Harry thought that Dumbledore might have been notified by Gringotts, once Malfoy had him removed from the Black Line, but judging from the quick flash of anger in the man's eyes, clearly not. 2 points me, 0 to Dumbledore. Pardon me, Amelia, I must have forgotten Harry was the only heir to the Black Line. I had assumed that Narcissa would try, and have young Draco take it over eventually. Malfoy curled his upper lip up in distaste, but sat back in his chair, and crossed one leg over the other, appearing entirely unconcerned with Dumbledore. Harry was envious for a moment. He wished he had sat like that originally. He'd look like a prat if he did it now. Malfoy looked so aloof and disinterested in the proceedings that he would almost believe that the man was bored. Shall we discuss the matter at hand? Dumbledore asked with another smile towards Madame Bones. Not just yet, Malfoy drawled. We have a number of things to discuss today and are waiting on our final guest. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair and folded his hands politely on his desk. Very well, he said evenly. We will begin once they arrive then. Begrudgingly, Harry could admit that Dumbledore was excellent at appearing unflappable. 1 point Dumbledore, he thought irritably. They all sat in silence as the clock ticked down. Harry desperately wanted to turn around and see what facial expression Snape was wearing, but held himself back. Do not look at Severus too often, Madame Bones warned him before they arrived. Albus is not aware of his impending guardianship, and we don't want to give him any clues beforehand. So Harry sat with his back straight, and silently studied his hands in his lap, until a quarter after when their final arrival came through the flue. Harry, Minister Fudge cried, coming over to shake Harry's hand. How are you, lad? In Wixen society it is proper to greet the guest with the most political power and standing first. The Contessa had instructed him Sunday afternoon during one of their now regular luncheons. The only exception to this is direct family members, spouses, children, or parents. 3 points Harry, 1 Dumbledore, he grinned as he shook the minister's hand. It's great to see you again, he said, lacing his tone with warmth. Thank you for clearing space out of your busy schedule to come. It means a lot to me. As expected, Fudge puffed his chest out proudly. Nothing of it, lad, of course I came. Reinstating the future Lord Potterblack to his rightful British education is no menial task, he winked at Harry. Cornelius, how are you? Dumbledore stood and offered his hand to Fudge. I wasn't aware that Harry would require the head of the DMLE, a barrister, and the Minister of Magic for a conversation with his headmaster. Harry opened his mouth to respond when Mr. Malfoy shook his head subtly. I will do the majority of the speaking. You have hired me to represent you, and will need to allow me to do my job, he told Harry very seriously on Friday night. What if Dumbledore wants me to say something? Harry asked. Then you look to me for your official response. Malfoy appeared thoughtful when he explained. Imagine yourself as too good to speak to Dumbledore. Put yourself in the state of mind that he is nothing more than a slug beneath your boots, and speaking to him only gives more weight to his words. Malfoy looked entirely bored as he spoke. Heir Potterblack requires legal representation, which I am here for. Madame Bones is here to represent Heir Potterblack in loco parentis, as he is a ward of the ministry pending his change in guardianship. And the minister is here because we are unable to give you this. Malfoy paused to pull an official-looking rolled scroll from his inner robe pocket and placed it on Dumbledore's desk, without his presence. Dumbledore gave Mr. Malfoy a polite smile and unrolled the scroll to read. Lawsuit for defamation of character and a civil suit for a refund of tuition. Even though Malfoy had given Dumbledore the scroll, the old man still turned his steely gaze to Harry. Harry, I believe there may have been some misunderstanding here, he said in what was probably meant to sound like a friendly tone of voice, but instead just sounded saccharine. I wanted to speak with you today about rejoining your classmates at Hogwarts. Oh, we will, Malfoy cut in smoothly. Now that there has been a third child injured on your watch, and Mr. Potter was not even permitted on the grounds, there is no purpose to his expulsion. As thin as the original evidence was to begin with, we believe that there should be no hesitation in granting Heir Potterblack his rightful education. Of course not, Fudge said. Harry was proven innocent. We'll have him back in his dorm tonight. He winked again at Harry, who played his part right and gave him a friendly smile. Thank you, sir, Harry said politely. But as that is a moot point at this time, the other issues at hand will need resolved, Malfoy continued. We would first demand the return of Heir Potterblack's tuition, as he was exiled from the place of learning. Dumbledore shook his head and sighed lightly. I'm afraid I can't do that. Tuition is not eligible to be refunded in cases of expulsion. Unless the expulsion is later overturned or otherwise found to be unlawful, Madame Bones corrected him, which in this case, it was unlawful and will be overturned by the end of this meeting. Since Harry's overall education was severely impacted by an unlawful and overturned expulsion, he is eligible for a full refund of tuition for this year. Harry gave a smug smile at Dumbledore, as the man clearly struggled to find a reason to withhold the money his parents had prepaid for his schooling. Very well, he finally acquiesced. I can send a note to Gringotts and have it done soon. Malfoy pulled another parchment from his robe and slid it across the desk. Or you can sign this now and it can be completed immediately, he said coolly. 4-1, he tracked as Dumbledore signed the parchment, which immediately disappeared. As for the defamation of character suit, Heir Potterblack is requesting a sum total of 10,000 galleons to be paid directly by Albus Dumbledore for creating a false statement about the persons of Heir Potterblack which publicly injured his name, his familial lines, and his personal reputation, Malfoy said. I do not believe I created a false statement regarding Mr. Potter, Dumbledore said, his tone just a few shades cooler than it had been before. You expelled him on the basis that he petrified multiple other students. We have now proven that he did not do this. You made the statement with no proof and it injured Heir Potterblack's reputation. That is the case we have against you now, Malfoy said in an impressive tone that was both bored and disdainful. Have we proven that Mr. Potter was not responsible for the third attack? Dumbledore asked quietly. Because I believe we have yet to catch the culprit and Mr. Potter still remains the most viable suspect. Harry was incredibly amused to hear the Minister of Magic snort incredulously. Come now, Dumbledore, 3 attacks, and the lad wasn't even here for the third one. How could he have done it? Dumbledore inclined his head minutely in the minister's direction, though he kept his eyes locked on to Harry's. Where has Mr. Potter been? He glanced at Madame Bones before returning his gaze to Harry. Perhaps if the person he was residing with wished to alibi him, then we could absolutely strike him as a suspect. Harry heard Snape scoff lightly from behind him, and he gave a faint grin. Dumbledore was a moron if he thought that anyone in the room was going to fall for that. He'd find out who Harry stayed with when the rest of the Wixen world did after it was legally cemented. Surely you aren't still blaming him, Fudge cried. We all know whose pet monsters killed a poor girl before. Not a coincidence they're still here and it's opened again, Dumbledore. I want it understood, Cornelius, that Hagrid has my full confidence, said Dumbledore, frowning at Fudge. Hagrid, the groundskeeper, there's no way he's the heir of Slytherin. It was a ridiculous idea to even consider. Yes, well, we'll go visit him once we finish up here, Fudge said sharply. Harry would have felt bad for the groundskeeper, until he remembered how the large man had dropped him off in Surrey, with a cheerful farewell at Dumbledore's orders. Him choosing the wrong side is no concern of mine, he told himself firmly. Returning to the issue at hand, Malfoy said smoothly with a polite nod to the minister and a curled lip at Dumbledore. The facts remain that you issued an official statement which has been proven to be false, which injured Heir Potterblack's representation, and which has caused him emotional distress. We can resolve the matter today or in open court at a later date, at which time of course we will be adding passive neglect of a dependent and kidnapping of a minor to the charges, both of which carry additional fines of 15,000 galleons and 22,000 galleons respectively. And that, finally, broke Dumbledore's composure. And what grounds do you threaten me with those charges? He demanded. You carried no legal right to Heir Potterblack's placement on the night of his parents' death, and yet you took it upon yourself to remove the infant from his parents' home and placed him with supposed relatives, all while bypassing the legal system in place for cases as his, Malfoy said. Furthermore, you then neglected to check on the welfare of Heir Potterblack despite placing him in the home of muggles who had not passed any checks or inquiries that the homes of orphaned children are subjected to. This led to assault, physical abuse, emotional abuse, gross neglect, and mental trauma to Heir Potterblack. Harry stared very hard at his new robes he wore, fighting down the urge to blush. It was embarrassing having the Minister of Magic hearing these things about him. Mr. Potter's godfather was imprisoned, Dumbledore said. Voldemort's followers were still afoot, as I'm sure you are aware, Lucius. His relative's home was the safest place for him, and I have seen no proof of any alleged abuse done to the boy by his relatives who are, by all accounts, a loving family. No abuse? Harry asked sharply, looking up at the headmaster and forgetting his one and only job to remain quiet. Did they give me this as a bloody birthday gift? He demanded, gesturing towards the large scar on his right cheek. I was 7, he hissed, and my aunt struck me with a pan so hard it cracked and the second swing cut my face wide open. Harry ignored Snape's hiss of anger and focused on Dumbledore's face. Look me in the eyes and tell me they're a loving family. It's okay, Harry, Madame Bones murmured. You don't have to prove anything. The records will speak for themselves in open court. Surely this doesn't need to go to court, Fudge said nervously. Albus can see the way to prevent that, right, Albus? The minister will want this to go to court just as minimally as you do, Malfoy had explained. He will put the pressure on Dumbledore to accept our initial offer so that citizens do not blame the ministry for your placement with your relatives. Dumbledore shot a cold look towards Snape, who Harry turned his head slightly to see was actively glaring harshly at the headmaster. I will agree on the contingency that the matter of Harry Potter's placement prior to today will never again be held against me, he eventually said. Malfoy looked at Harry, who gave Dumbledore a cockeyed look of amusement. Never again be held against you legally, he offered with a cold smile. Dumbledore's eyes flashed with something that looked remarkably like fear. As you wish, Mr. Potter. He sighed the newly offered parchment from Malfoy and then sat back heavily in his chair. Is there anything else? He asked. I believe the matter of Mr. Potter's expulsion will still be officially nullified, Snape said from his place in the back of the room. Of course, Dumbledore said with a small smile towards the potions master. Mr. Potter, I am pleased to officially reinstate you as a second-year student to Hogwarts Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry could see how strained the headmaster's smile was and how cold his eyes were. He'd leave me on the streets forever if he could. Thank you, sir, Harry said politely, solely for Minister Fudge's benefit. I'm sure the rest of this year will be much better once you find the actual culprit of these attacks. It is your fault these students are being attacked, he thought as hard as he could in Dumbledore's direction. If someone dies, it is your fault. Dumbledore must have at least read some of his thoughts off Harry's face, because his fake smile disappeared into a tight-lipped frown. The headmaster stood up and walked behind him to a shelf and grabbed the sorting hat and lightly tossed it across the desk to Harry. Because you were officially removed from Hogwarts' roster, you will have to be resorted, he said, his voice kind but his eyes hard. Please place the hat on your head. Harry glanced at Madame Bones and Malfoy, both of whom nodded at him, before he pulled the hat on his head. The first time he had worn the hat they had talked, argued, debated, and discussed the pros and cons of Harry entering each house. It had resulted in the longest sorting in Hogwarts history. This time, the hat barely touched the hair on Harry's head before it opened its wide brim and shouted, "Slytherin." Harry couldn't help it. After he gave Dumbledore back the hat, he glanced behind him at Snape again. Snape's face was mostly neutral, but Harry was sure he could see the corners of his mouth trying to pull up into a small smile. And his wand, Snape drawled from behind him. Dumbledore easily opened his desk drawer and pulled out Harry's wand. Here you go, your wand. Harry didn't know why, but he could see that out of all the things that Dumbledore had to do that morning, giving Harry his wand back angered him the most. Harry grabbed it quickly and felt exhilarated at the rush of warmth the wand had once it touched his palm. He gave Dumbledore a scornful look as he carefully placed his wand back in the holster it belongs in. 5-1, I win. Wonderful lad, Minister Fudge cheered, leaping to his feet. I believe that is all the business you had on your agenda with Harry, right, Lucius? Mr. Malfoy nodded, standing and straightening his robes. It is, although I should warn you, Headmaster, if I hear of any improprieties or illegalities regarding the way you treat my client, I will be back. Oh. Dumbledore didn't reply, but gave Malfoy a small nod of acknowledgement. I would like to speak with Mr. Potter alone, regarding his missed coursework, Dumbledore said evenly, as the rest of the room rose to their feet. I will take care of that, Snape immediately offered. Yes, Fudge agreed. Let your professors do the job you hired them for, I believe the rest of us, he gestured towards Madame Bones, Mr. Malfoy, Dumbledore and himself, have an errand to run on the grounds. Arresting Hagrid will not stop the attacks, Dumbledore said in a cool tone. It would be a colossal mistake and waste of time and resources. Much like expelling Harry, Madame Bones suggested, I believe the man who was arrested for killing a classmate before is a more useful lad to consider. It is a necessary precaution, Minister Fudge said, twirling his bowler in his hand. We cannot be seen to be doing nothing. Why don't you run along to your common room? Snape murmured quietly in Harry's ear, having stepped up behind him silently in the noise of the argument between the three other Wixen. I believe you will find 8 children skipping class, in preparation to either celebrate your return or incinerate the castle. Harry turned and gave Snape a beaming smile. Yes, sir. He interrupted the harsh argument between Dumbledore, Madame Bones, Mr. Malfoy, and Minister Fudge to wish 3 of the 4 a good day before taking off out the door. Harry knew 3 things as absolute facts as he rushed down to the dungeons in search of his friends. 1. His gang was going to lose their minds when he tells them how Dumbledore had to pay him 10,000 galleons and refund his full tuition from this year. 2. Dumbledore never apologized for a single thing he had done to Harry. 3. Harry would remind him of that fact when he causes him to choke on his own blood one day.